practices, but today we're going to take a look at some things not to do as you get started with any sort of a digital technology selection project. So what I'm going to do is walk you through a bit of a quick overview of Real Story Group and who we are as an organization, and then from there my colleague Jarrod Jingles will dive into the meat of the presentation about what we can do to help avoid any sort of issues as you're going through a digital technology selection project. So let me just get you going here with the slides. And again, in terms of who we are as an organization, we will help you around selecting digital technology solutions in a couple different ways. You can look at the tools in terms of their strengths and weaknesses from our digital technology research on topics like web content management, digital asset management, etc. And we offer something called Real Quadrant, where you can look at the customized short lists and create the list that's going to best match your specific criteria and use cases. We also will come on site and do some occasional selection projects with you as a member of your team and really get to know you as an organization and where you're looking to go, and we'll work with you on how best to get there. And then finally, we offer a product called Real Score, where you can actually benchmark your digital effectiveness against your industry peers and see how effective you are with the technology solutions that you already have in place. These are our coverage areas, and what you'll see here is they really fall into two major buckets, right? We have for digital workplace technology, markets like enterprise portals, ECM, etc., along with digital marketing technology, so things like web content management, digital asset management, etc. But what really makes us unique in terms of our offerings is the fact that we don't do any work for the vendors that we evaluate within our research. So we don't speak at their conferences, we don't write white papers for them or advise them on their strategy. And why that's important to you is you can rest assured that you're getting the real story about the solutions, what they're doing well, but maybe more importantly, where they could fall short for you. And so we really take a pull no punches approach when detailing that type of information to you. So what I'm going to do now is turn things over to my colleague Jarrod Jingles, who's our managing director, and is going to really walk us through the heart of today's presentation. Jarrod?
Great, thanks, Scott. And thank you all for taking some time out of your busy day. We appreciate that as always. And today we're going to talk about something, as Scott mentioned, that's near and dear to our heart. And I'm sure many of you on the line have heard all those crazy stats that are out there about how many technology projects fail. And the one that's most commonly thrown around is about half of technology projects fail, they say. And why is that? Well, technology, doing and implementing technology and rolling it out successfully is hard. And there are a lot of things can go wrong during the implementation process. Lots of things can go on during the rollout and the change management process. But from where I sit, there's nothing more depressing or saddening than seeing projects go off the rails before they even have a chance to be successful. And so that's where this presentation was born out of. You know, in our talking to the hundreds of people that we're talking to in our network to get information that goes back into our vendor evaluation research, in the many consulting projects we do every year, we've learned a lot of lessons around over the years, and we've tried to compile, you know, really the top 5 mistakes that we see organizations make at the real early outset of a project that can cause those projects to go off the rails. So Scott, next slide please, and we'll get to mistake number 1, and that is shortlisting the wrong vendors. And I'm sure many of you have seen this graphic. You know, it seems you can't read a press release online today without coming across this graphic from Scott Brinker at chiefmartech.com, and the latest version of this marketing technology landscape aims to show all the different software vendors who are playing in the marketing technology space, and they're calling it the MarTech 5000 this year because there's over 5,000 different vendors at play here. And that's all well and good, and options are always good for you as buyers, but not surprisingly, there's a lot of confusion, and there's a real risk of you putting the wrong vendors on your short list. And with every one of these 5,000 vendors, you're getting very mixed sales pitches and information out there from the sales teams of these vendors and the marketing teams, and it's very confusing for you as a buyer to figure out, all right, who should be on my short list. And as analysts, on the next slide, Scott, you can see, we try to make some sense of this world ourselves. And, we're not perfect, but what we try to do is try to put some boxes around some of these markets in ways to help you make some sense out of what we're seeing from all the options that you have available to you. As Scott mentioned, we cover 8 different marketplaces. This is our kind of fun little way of representing the 8 different marketplaces as lines of a subway map, and each of these lines represents a different marketplace, and each of the stops on this map represents one of the over 150 different vendors that we cover. So we've tried to boil down to what we consider the most significant vendors in the marketplaces that we cover, but again, there's still a risk, even at this level, that you pick the wrong vendor. So how do we suggest that you pick the right vendor? Well, the first thing I want you to do is ask yourself, what are you trying to do? So instead of just saying, show me all the best CRM vendors or show me all the best DAM vendors, first start out by saying, all right, what are we trying to do? So here's an example of some scenarios that we have called out in regards to our enterprise collaboration and social software research, where we have a number of canonical scenarios defined that we hope that you align yourself with. So I want you to ask yourself, are you trying to do knowledge-based management? Are you trying to do project collaboration? Are you trying to do enterprise networking? Very different slices of what is offered by these types of tools, but what we've found is certain tools are fundamentally built to solve some of these canonical use cases, and very few, if any, are built to solve all of these use cases. So the first step in building the right shortlist is really to say, I need to find the vendors that are fundamentally built for what I'm trying to do. I need vendors with strengths in the areas that I'm trying to do. So because of this, we actually built a tool, something that we call Real Quadrant Shortlist Generator. And here's an example from our DAM research, and those of you who are subscribers on the line, I'm sure you're very familiar with this, but for those of you who are not, it's really simple. We have some more of those scenarios on the left side and in the app that you can actually try for yourself for free. If you go to the website, just click on Tools and then Real Quadrant. You can try this out for any of the marketplaces that we cover, but pick some scenarios that you think most align with what you're trying to do, and then based on the ratings that we give them, we'll spit out a quadrant that is fundamentally aligned with your needs. So it's not a single snapshot view of the marketplace. It's a snapshot of the marketplace that is customized to what you told us is most important to you. And this is just an example from our DAM research that someone generated. The next person who fills this out will probably get a very different Real Quadrant, but this is one example. And as you might imagine, what I want you to do is don't look at those single snapshot views of the marketplace that you can just Google, the one size fits all ones that are out there, and expect that to give you your short list. But rather, I want you to really challenge these guys and challenge yourself to find the vendors that are most fundamentally aligned with what it is you're trying to do, and make those vendors the vendors that you're going to take forward, put on your short list, and then do your due diligence on them. Mistake number 2. This is something that we call canned demos, and I don't know if any of you have ever sat in a vendor demos. Well, I can assure you I have, and I like to say this picture depicts some of the experiences that I've had where I'm the consultant in the middle sitting in on these demos with our clients, and to be honest, they can be pretty dull when you see these demos from the vendors. And vendor demo weeks are challenging, but they're really important part of a selection process where you see demos from each of the shortlisted vendors that you have on your list. But as dull as they can be, it can also lead to some other kind of challenges. A typical thing that we see is at the end of certain demos, we see vendors, their stakeholder teams really falling in love with the latest and greatest that the vendors came to the table with. And if you allow the vendors to really come in and just give the same canned demo that they give everywhere else, to every other client, at every other conference, you know what? They're just going to show you what their latest features and functionality are. And unfortunately, many buying teams I've seen like the sexy stuff. They like the newest stuff, and vendors, they want to show you all the sexy stuff that they've been working on. You know, the term that we're seeing constantly that every vendor wants to demonstrate is their artificial intelligence capabilities today. That, without a doubt, no matter what vendor we're talking about, they all want to lead with their artificial intelligence capabilities, which is all well and good if that's what you're really looking for. However, in most cases, the kind of technology that we're talking about is going to really impact the way your teams are going to work. So because of that, you really need to hone in on some of the not so sexy things, the real core capabilities of this system, the core functionality that your teams are going to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And how do you kind of make sure that you see the stuff that your teams really are concerned about? Well, the way we recommend you going about that is not allowing these vendors to come in and do their same canned demo that they give everyone else. Instead, we want you to describe a future state situation to these vendors in the form of a custom use case scenario. So here's an example here where we have a narrative use case laid out where we try to highlight some real actors, some real roles within your organization, some real environments that your people might be working within, some real types of content, and some real processes. And what we're trying to do here is, we always say we want to be descriptive without being overly prescriptive. So we want to describe a situation so that the vendors, when they see this, can say, okay, I understand what they're looking for, and here's how my solution can best solve that problem, as opposed to prescribing a solution so that they all come to the table with the exact same solution. You want to see your options and see different ways to attack the same problem. Next. So some final takeaways there. This might seem like common sense, but you want to make sure your team is represented at every single demo. You want to make sure that the vendors demo the same scenarios, ideally in the same order. So you tell them we're gonna demonstrate these demos in this amount of these scenarios in this amount of time in this order, because it really can help you compare apples to apples as you go through a very long and confusing demo week. So let's look at mistake number 3, and that's not getting the full implementation picture. And what we found is, when it comes to buying technology in 2017, and I think going forward in 2018 and 2019, I'm sure this will be the same, there's actually a big risk that enterprises overbuy and particularly overestimate their own capabilities when it comes to bringing in new technology. Way more so than the risk of underbuying. We like to say, if you have to move this pile of mulch around your yard to your flower beds, most people will say, well, I could just get a dump truck to do it. And sure, you could move that pile of mulch to your flower beds, but there's probably a much more cost-effective way of doing that, and one that might not ruin your entire backyard in the process. So how do you make sure that you don't underestimate your own skill set? Well, the first thing is to be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself in terms of how much of your in-house resources do you want doing the implementation, and really look to seeing where you should supplement those skills, whether it's from professional services from the vendor themselves, or from a third-party integrator who has done many similar implementations in the past, who can bring some knowledge from their experiences to the table. You know, people often ask, you know, should I go right to my vendor professional services organization, or should I go to the integrator? You know, that's the big question that people come up to when they say, we can't handle this ourselves. We need to go one direction or the other. But what we found in most cases is, oftentimes, I would say in most cases, you need some help from both, and this is a false choice. So more often than not, in large, complicated situations especially, we're seeing what we call a combination RFP, where you are not only testing the vendor and the technology from a vendor and their professional services that they offer, but you're also looking at a systems integrator at the same time. So instead of doing these as two separate RFP engagements, rather you're sending an RFP to the vendor and saying, hey, we recognize that we need help. Come to the table with your services plus your partner, the best partner that you can bring to us, and give us a combined bid, so that we can evaluate the whole team and the whole solution together. And in many cases, this combined approach can be really enlightening in terms of what you get from each of these parties, but also you learn a lot as to how well these parties will work together in addition with your team. So getting them to come to the table and wall off some responsibilities and communicate to you what the plan will be going forward is a very worthwhile exercise to go through as part of this early stage of the process. Next, mistake number 4 is not properly test driving the solution. You know, we always use the analogy of, would you buy a car without test driving it? Probably not. It's like walking into the showroom just saying, okay, that looks good, I'll take it. And that's not what you do in real life, and especially when you're going to be buying software that is going to cost you, in most cases, many multiples of what you'd actually spend on an automobile. So instead, what we recommend that you do is, when you winnow down your choices to your finalist, or ideally your final 2, we recommend that you conduct as real as possible what is sometimes called a bake-off or a competitive proof of concept. And the idea here is you make this proof of concept as real as you possibly can. You want to mimic a real implementation process as much as you can. So going back to those scenarios that we talked about earlier, this is a perfect time to bring back those scenarios and to tell your 2 finalists, okay, we want you to lead us through building out a couple of these scenarios in a way that that is really like a real project. So we want you to actually lead us through this from a project management perspective and show us what it would take to actually implement these scenarios, and then have our team actually test it. So you really get a sense of what it's like to accomplish those simple things that we talked about. You know, maybe those not so sexy things. What it's like to configure the users, create templates, modify workflows. This is also your opportunity to really treat it as a true proof of concept, where you can, if there's any lingering questions from the demo phase, let's prove that this particular technology can integrate in the way they said they could get this technology integrate with an existing legacy system, for example. That's a classic thing that you might want to prove out. So it's also your chance to get this team, to get your team to actually get their hands on the technology and work with the product. And then finally, it's really important to learn some lessons around what is it actually going to be like to work with this team behind this technology. So it's always this balance of learning what it's like to work with the technology, but don't estimate what it's like to work with the people behind it, the people that are actually going to be involved in an implementation, involved in the rollout, that is going to make this a true success. So our final mistake number 5, is waiting too late to negotiate. And this is one that we see over and over again, even from the most well-intentioned organizations. You know, the organizations that really put a lot of time and effort into doing a selection process right. You know, we can't state enough that there's always room to negotiate. List pricing is always negotiable, especially in the larger deals, and we have seen some pretty dramatic reductions. And you know, while smaller deals have some less room for flexibility, there is usually some room, and it might not be exactly on dollar value, but you can always negotiate, you know, user license, seats, training time, different forms of access, different types of support. Vendors today are, because you know, going back to that Martech 5000, there's a lot of competition out there, and these guys want your business, so there is always room for a negotiation. But if there's one mistake that happens over and over again when it comes to negotiation, it's that you're waiting too long to negotiate. So even like I mentioned, the organizations that follow the full process, we call this our full process RSVP, real story vendor procurement. It's actually a subject that is near and dear to our heart and something that we're very passionate about. In fact, that you might have seen on an earlier slide, my colleague Tony and I just published a book on this topic called The Right Way to Select Technology, that takes you through each of these steps and gives you some real examples of what happens along the way here. But even those that follow every step to a T, they often will wait till they go through the whole process, winnow it down, go through the proof of concept, and then decide to negotiate. And well, I can tell you, you know, these software vendors have some very savvy salespeople, and they know that you've made this investment into the selection process, and they know they have you over a barrel if you wait to the end till you've already made your decision. So what I propose that you do is you start the negotiation process much earlier. So you want to start that process as soon as you are getting your first look at a proposal from a vendor. You know, you want to continue that negotiation in the context of your vendor demos, continue it into the proof of concept, and then refine it as you make your final decision. And what we found is if you have this back and forth, it tends to be a much more productive process, because not only are you getting to know the vendor and the people behind the vendor and behind the technology and the various partners that might be involved, they're also getting to know you. So what might have been a fairly black box to begin with when they've put that first proposal over the wall is becoming much clearer to the vendors themselves, so that they're able to refine their pricing at the same time. So it works for both sides, and ultimately this is a contract negotiation, and you're trying to get closer and closer to an agreement as you go through this. But the key takeaway here is you can't divorce this financial piece from the rest of the selection. You have to keep it as a key part in this at every step of the way. Sometimes in some organizations this takes various forms, but some organizations, I think it makes sense to have legal involved in the process. Some organizations, it makes sense to have someone from your finance department involved, and make it clear to the vendors right from the start that price is a key factor in all of this, and it should be. Everyone's conscious of price, and sometimes ultimately the value that you get from these systems, the return on investment that you get on these initiatives and these projects is really what is going to deem this project a success or not. And so making sure you get the best price from the beginning starts with negotiating early. So in summary, here's our 5 mistakes to avoid: shortlisting the wrong vendors, only viewing canned demos, underestimating the full implementation picture, improperly test driving the solution, and finally waiting too late to negotiate. Hopefully some of these resonated with you. If anyone has any questions, now's a great time to enter that into the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll see if we have time for one or two. But while we wait for that, you know, I did want to just offer a behind-the-scenes demo to any of the research that I talked about today, or any of the tools that Scott or I mentioned, including that Real Quadrant Shortlist Builder. You can try it out yourself, but if anyone wants a behind-the-scenes view, you know, feel free to reach out to Scott or myself, and we'll make sure you get that. And as always, if you want a free excerpt, an entire chapter from any of those 8 research streams that we talked about, that's available to you as well. So the one question that we have at the moment is around detailed requirements. Should we start with detailed, when should we do our detailed requirements gathering? And that's a great question. And if I would have added a 6th mistake, I might have said, don't start your selection processes by doing a detailed requirements gathering exercise. That might surprise some people, but there's always time for that in actually designing your solution. You're going to want to do a detailed requirements gathering. But when it comes to determining what you need to pick the right vendor, you don't have to get down to the nth degree of requirements. Really what you need to hone in on is what we like to call the differentiating requirements. What makes your situation unique, and what would tilt the scales in terms of choosing one vendor over the other. And so that's where I want you to hone in on what makes your situation different and include those types of requirements in your use case scenarios. So again, don't waste all that time doing that full requirements gathering up front. Hone in on the differentiating ones, and then do your detailed requirements gathering at a later stage when you're actually doing your implementation. All right, well, I think we're just about out of time, and I thank you all again for joining us for this installment of the Real Story Group webinar series. As always, we appreciate you spending some of your day with us, and I encourage you to keep up the conversation. Feel free to email me at any time, link in with me, reach out via Twitter or whatnot, and we'd be happy to continue the conversation. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.